Hey there, welcome to episode 6.
We are ready to go.
Episode 6 of the Pod Couple with your hosts, Kyle Gherkin and Steve Hubbs. Now, this is a very exciting episode of the Pod Couple because, when we first started this, we did not research the name to see whether it was taken until after the fact. And we found that it was indeed taken by a Turkish podcast, which went off the air in 2013. So, but they only recorded 5 episodes, and therefore we have now become the most prolific pod couple with 2 Ds in existence. So take that, Turkish podcast.
Take that, Turkey. Although probably that's politically insensitive given the bombing that happened yesterday. So never mind. Sorry, Turkey. Our hearts and minds go out to you.
Sorry about that, but at the same time, USA. So anyway, that's the exciting news we have at the top. Beyond that, we're gonna get into some TV here with little Horace and Pete. Now, Horace and Pete is the newest creation of Louis C.K. We're big fans of Louis C.K. here on the podcast. Love his show Louis on FX, his stand-up, all that. Now, the show Louis has been, the FX show has been known for doing a lot of experimentation. And when it comes to experimentation, I think that's probably the best way to sum up this whole thing. This really feels like a giant experiment.
It does.
This Horace and Pete is, for those who don't know, this is something, it's not airing on a network or anything. It's something that Louis is doing, financing completely out of his own pocket. It's sort of a sitcom.
Well, that's the funny thing is that when we initially had talked about doing this show, I knew nothing about it, essentially, other than the fact that it was being released on, and self-financed by Louis. So I assumed it was a sitcom after seeing one very brief clip. And so then I thought, well, let's talk about sitcoms. It'll be an interesting time to do that for the TV segment of the show. And then I watched the first episode and I was like, oh, this is not a sitcom at all. It is, maybe ostensibly set up like a very sad episode of Cheers.
Right.
But it's actually a play. It's essentially a filmed play.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something I didn't realize that was the case either, or at least that it was going to be this degree. Because, of course, any 3-camera sitcom, the traditional format is somewhat like a filmed play to start with. I think that was the general idea behind it, but this really takes it to the extreme. And it's the way it's not like a play is that there's no audience, there's no laugh track, and there's no soundtrack even. The only music is diegetic, like the music that comes out.
Jukebox.
The jukebox.
That famous song from the jukebox.
Yeah.
It's like, doop, 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 doop. That's the whole soundtrack to the show.
The only exception is when they're coming in and out of intermissions and the beginning end of the show. There is a very minimalist score. Very sad minimalist score. So
for a bunch of people with sad minimalist lives.
Yes. So anyway, let's talk about the show. It's definitely fascinating. I do love that Louis is the type of guy that will just say, "Hey, I want to do this."
Yeah, not resting on his laurels at all. Could easily just go around at this point. He's enough of a name in the comedy community that he could just be selling out arenas and making money off of doing that. But he wants to do artistic and different things.
Right. Not only a name as a stand-up comedian, which he obviously could continue doing, but he already has a successful show, or at least a critically acclaimed show, which, as far as I understand, FX, is willing to let him make it for as long as he wants.
Yeah.
So to say, okay, I want to do something else in the television space besides the show I already have, and I want to do it badly enough that I'm willing to finance it out of my own pocket, to do this kind of weird experimental televised play thing that I'm just going to sell directly to the people from my website, is fascinating. Just look into his psyche and kind of what drives him as an artist.
Yeah, he's really honest about his own vision, about his commitment to his vision, because you can kind of see a lot of this stuff that he covers in Horace and Pete, he could have just folded that into Louie. I mean, Louie's not a show that necessarily is pinned down by one particular set of rules. So you could have just done that. He could have worked all this through, but he had a very specific vision in mind. We've seen 3 episodes.
Yes.
So I don't know what that full vision is.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know if he knows, because from what I understand, first off, there's 7 episodes currently out. We watched the first 3 for this podcast, so we can only speak to those. But from what I've read, he doesn't even know how many episodes they're going to be. He's just sort of flying by the seat of his pants. In fact, they're making these literally on a weekly basis where they're shooting them and then they're releasing them the same week, which is a very unusual. I mean, obviously most sitcoms, they're at least several weeks ahead of schedule as far as shooting. And so, but you know, I think one of the things that allows them to do that is the fact that there's so little editing involved in this. And that's something that we can talk about, you know, further. But as far as how it's, again, like a play, not only does it...
Hold on, I got to take this. It wouldn't be a podcast without a phone call. All right.
I was hoping you'd actually take it on air.
I'm back.
Yeah, so we didn't have a, you know, there's actually it reminds me, there's a dearth of cell phones in that I guess there is a cell phone plot at the very beginning, but as I say, it seemed like there were less. It feels like a very much an older thing, you know. It feels like it's in a bar that takes place not in present day, but then of course there are
super topical.
Yeah, there are topical things that dropped, like Syrian refugees and Donald Trump, whatever, that let you know that it is in the present day. But if it wasn't for that stuff, you almost could think this is happening in the 1980s or 90s or whatever.
The aesthetics there, even in the room that he lives, that's above the bar. There, that whole, though, it's kitschy and kind of like 1970s, All in the Family. Probably another nod to All in the Family, which I know CK loves, and which he kind of based. Lucky Louie was supposed to be, that old show was supposed to be kind of a remake of that, and it seems like that maybe never got the traction that he wanted. So this is his sort of darker reimagining of even that.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that for sure. And it is interesting how a lot of these, it feels like a lot of these comedians, especially comedians of Louis' generation, they are attracted to these older formats. You know, they seem to have these legacy formats. For example, the late night show. You know, so many of these guys have an obsession with the late night show. You know, the Tonight Show and all, and the Letterman format. And so many of them, you know, wanted to do that at one point, or even if they didn't necessarily, it wasn't their dream, it's something that they wondered about. I mean, there's an episode of Louis about that very thing where, you know, Louis might get to inherit the Letterman show.
Yeah, there's a couple episode arc. Well, that's like a whole, almost like a whole season where that's sort of that's the overarching thread, right?
I thought it was just a couple episodes, but anyway, regardless, yeah, it's so. But there's that, and then again with these older sitcom formats, like you said, talk about All in the Family or some of these classics, and then stripping that down even to what we're seeing here, which is, again, very akin to just almost turning a camera on and having people stand in front of it. I mean, the thing besides having no audience, the thing that separates it, I think, from the modern sitcoms we've become accustomed to is how little editing there is, how few cuts there are. I mean, the camera will just sit there for long stretches on, you know, a scene with very little movement, you know, just maybe a few adjustments to focus sometimes, depending on who's speaking. And that's, like I said, I don't know if that's something that happened in the very early days of television when they were first figuring out how to make television. And this is a throwback to that, or what?
Well, it seems like he has basically taken his eye or his focus off of the editing and actual camera movement, and sort of turned his attention towards blocking and sort of having everybody react to something at once, and then just everyone's actual performance, the acting in this show. That some of the performances in this show are stellar.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess let's get into some of the details, but I mean, ultimately, my first question, 3 episodes in, is, does it work for you? I mean, we were talking about, like, I think we're both fascinated by this experiment. I think we're both very excited that somebody is, like Louis, is willing to do something completely out of the box like this. But does it work for you?
Yeah, it does work for me, absolutely. And I think that it won't work for everybody. I'm a huge CK fan, and my respect for his endeavor here, it comes with the territory. I would say that I wasn't... The first 2 episodes, I noticed a lot more of the flaws of the show, or maybe the drawbacks of the show. One of the things I noticed is that, and I was kind of occurred to me as this was coming up organically, so I don't have a great name for it, but I would call it perhaps the uncanny valley of dialogue. So much dialogue in so many standard TV shows is completely contrived, but as long as it rests like comfortably in the narrative of the show, so if you have like a Sorkin-esque show or even something like a procedural, it's like, yeah, obviously it's contrived, but that's the nature of entertainment. So what happens here is that this dialogue gets very close to feeling like an actual conversation a lot of the time, so then when it doesn't land or doesn't work, it's like extra jarring.
Right.
You know, and it's interesting because it's still definitely all in Louis's voice, and it all springs from that one particular place, which some actors are better at handling than others. You know, Alan Alda's character is fantastic, and he feels 100% real and authentic. And when he's up against some of these other guys who
he's about as delightful as a crotchety old racist
dude,
can be.
It's so good. It's such a great performance, man. He really sells it, and he owns the energy and the space, and you can tell he has that experience of being in a play. I mean, he's done Broadway and off-Broadway stuff for years, and he owns like the entire environment around him, and it's 100% authentic. Then you have guys that are used to being in front of audiences because they're stand-up comedians, but they're not necessarily actors. And so when they're speaking with, like, for example, Kurt Metzger and Nick DiPaolo are both, like, Nick DiPaolo is a fairly conservative-leaning comedian, and Kurt Metzger is a pretty liberal comedian. And so you can tell Louis uses them, and he sort of writes for them, in his voice, but what he thinks that their voices, their sides of the exchange would be. And, I mean, they do a fine job, but when they're sitting in front of Alan Alda, who's just murdering it and sucking in all of the energy and the attention and the focus, I mean, you can really see that.
Yeah, there's definitely, there are definitely big drop-offs between certain actors in the show, and that's something that can be a little jarring. I know when Edie Falco walks on the stage,
You can just tell.
yeah, it's like she's on another level. She's kind of just starts blowing people off the stage, and it's like, and even then, you know, somebody like Louis, who I think has grown a lot as an actor over the years, and is definitely good at a certain type of thing now as an actor, but you know, he's not on the level of Alan Alda or Edie Falco or Steve Buscemi or somebody like that who's a true actor. And and you can tell.
He does a really great job of holding his own, I think, in this, though.
Yeah.
Like, he's not, again, just goes back to the idea of him taking chances. Like, he probably could have cast somebody else as a lead guy, but he wanted to do it. He probably wants to, you know, break his bones a little bit, get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, I totally respect it. Like I said, I think he's able to pull it off. But again, you can see that with not just with him, but with some of the actors too. You can tell the differences when he brings in, you know, the big guns. So
yeah, I was worried before Falco showed up that it was just going to be the Alan Alda show the entire time,
right?
And it was going to basically be my attention always wanting Alda to like say something else. You know what I mean? Like, get the rest of these schmoes out of here, and then when Falco shows up and she totally can match. Go blow for blow with Alda. That was a great relief. And then the craziest thing happened. So the first 2 episodes, I'm like, okay, I have an idea exactly of what this show is going to be.
Right.
You know? And then the 3rd episode comes along, and Laurie Metcalf shows up, apropos of nothing.
Right.
You don't know what's going on. She delivers one of the meatiest... We were talking about... I was actually thinking about how you were talking about Jason Robard's monologue and how, like, so few actors get a chance to do something like that's that long and that requires
his
that
monologue
much
from
focus.
Magnolia.
Yeah, his monologue from Magnolia. And Laurie Metcalf does, like, easily, it's like twice as long as whatever Robard's monologue is. That's like the meatiest thing I've seen an actor do in terms of just what she would have to memorize. Like, I can't believe, like, she did that in a week. She memorized that in a week and then aired it. That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, I wonder how much room she was given to improvise at the edges, because it definitely is very naturalistic, the style of it. You know, she does a lot of pausing and stumbling over her words and things like that. So, but I mean, regardless, I mean, it's tremendous. It's quite a, it's just something to see.
Yeah, it is. It's my favorite performance of the year so far.
Wow.
It blew me away.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, just in the beginning, I mean, it's so strange because the way it starts out, literally the first maybe 6 or 7 minutes, it's just her, and it's one shot. There's no cuts, and you don't even know what's going on. I mean, it's the camera literally is just a one shot on her, and then when they finally cut away, you see that she's having a conversation with Louis, but it's not, or with Horace, the character of Horace, but you didn't even know that until then. And he begins interjecting some things at this point, and they actually start involving some cuts, but it's still the first maybe half of the episode, something like about 25 minutes or something, is largely driven by her, with him just interjecting.
Yeah, and even when he comes back in, I mean, it's still like a 90-10 split. Like, she still gets almost all of it.
Right.
And it's just essentially up until the very, very end, it's just the two of them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's such an unusual, I mean, again, it's like he's already taking this thing that's extremely experimental, as we were saying, in this very out of the box, and then he just pushes that even farther in that third episode, just when you start thinking, okay, well, he's doing something different.
Yeah, sad cheers.
But now,
sad cheers.
Right, but now I know where that is, and it's like, nope, you don't know what I'm doing, because I'm going to come at you with something completely different. And yeah, and it was pretty incredible. That was definitely my favorite episode. I'm assuming it was yours too.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's hardly even an episode of TV at this point. It was almost just, again, like a piece of performance art. But
yeah, it's one of those things that once it's over, you get the feeling that any aspiring young actress who's like auditioning to get an acting scholarship, or who wants to get a particular part, like, use this scene right here, because there's so much, like, by the end of this, you'll know whether or not you can act. It gives you everything you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, I would say, it's interesting. I did find that the show, after that first episode, became funnier. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the first episode I was a little worried, because, I mean, not that I need, everything to be laugh out loud hilarious.
Yeah, or joke.
Right, exactly. Certainly. I mean, I like a lot of dramedy type stuff, but it's pretty fucking bleak.
Yeah.
After that first episode, and you're going, I don't know. Yeah. Do I want to live in this universe?
Yeah, every character is a dumpster fire.
Right.
Except for, like, the nice girlfriend who seems perfectly fine, but then she just, like, then Louis just totally fucking snaps her neck,
so she gets destroyed. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a tough watch. And so, I was happy to see some more humor being injected in later episodes, but though I don't know if that's, well, I guess I don't even know if that's, it's hard to say whether the later episodes are funnier or if I just became more accustomed to that universe. That's what I'm trying to puzzle out in my own head.
It's hard to say what I've watched.
Right.
Like, first of all, each episode is an hour long, so it's not even breaks from the traditional sitcom kind of format in that way. It's like hour-long episode.
Well, and not even that, they're actually very different lengths. I don't know if you noticed, but the first episode is an hour and 7 minutes. The second episode is 50 minutes, and the third episode is 42 minutes. So
I did not notice that.
So it's like he doesn't even feel constrained by any time formats. I don't know if that's going to continue.
He's run amok, Kyle.
I know.
He cannot be stopped.
I mean, again, why not, right? I mean, why the fuck not? If you're in a position where you're producing it yourself and you're airing it just directly on your own website, then why should you feel constrained? If you want to make a 42-minute episode or a 20-minute episode or a 2-hour episode, I mean, I guess you can just do it. And that's what we're seeing is a man who's completely in control of what he wants to do and just choosing to do it in his own way. And I mean, again, that for that alone, I think it's worth watching. I don't know that the whole thing totally works for me. I mean, I'll keep watching it.
Yeah.
But there is a point, and be contrarian, I guess, or maybe maybe anti-contrarian in this case, to say, okay, we just talked about last week, for example, like how film as a medium is able to accomplish all these things that other mediums can't necessarily match in terms of a stage play or a book or whatever, because of all the tools at a filmmaker's disposal in terms of the camera, the actors,
and the total control over the world building,
right? The editing, etc. So with this show, you're really stripping away a lot of those tools, and so
but that probably allows you to focus on other things.
it does. I mean, and certainly, like you said, I think performance wise, like you would probably never see something quite like that Laurie Metcalf performance in a traditional film or television show. But by the same token, you know, if I'm going to watch a television show, do I want to see those tools put to use? If I want to watch a film, do I want to see those tools put to use? I'm not saying there's one way to make a film or whatever. So, I mean, I'm certainly open to it. Like I said, I mean, I'm watching the show. I'm enjoying it for what it is. But I can see that argument being made that I would, you know, if I want to see...
If I want to see a play, I'll go see a play.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of one of the advantages of seeing a play is the energy that you get. I mean, certainly, that's the big advantage, is that you're in a room full of people. It's like an organic experience. So when you take the people out and that you don't even have their reactions, and then you just still have sort of a filmed play, I get what you're saying. But, you know, any critiques of the show aside, like, definitely that third episode sold it for me as I have to know what he's doing next.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's definitely keeping it fresh, man.
I'm all in with you on that. One thing I noticed about the show that seemed struck me is that there does seem to be an outsized obsession with lusting after the elderly in this show.
Yeah, well, that's what if you figured you got Jessica Lange to work with, like you're just gonna write that in. That's gonna come naturally, you know.
Yeah, but then did that bleed over into the Laurie Metcalf episode as well?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, and I'm not entirely sure what CK is trying to set up. If he's just trying to emphasize dichotomies, or the idea of, you know, the right versus the left, the young versus the old, tradition versus, you know, innovation. So I don't know if the age thing is sort of a parallel to that. You know, because Laurie Metcalf's character, who was married to CK's character in the show, is older than him by a substantial margin too. And then she lusts after a guy that's even older,
right.
And he sort of has his fantasy thing with Jessica Lange. So
right.
I'm not entirely clear where that will all land, or if it will, but it's something to think about. Get your pause.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely something that made me say, what is he trying to work out here? You know, because I'm not sure yet, and maybe that will become clear as we watch further episodes.
And it's interesting to think about how dark this show starts, and how much CK is willing to push boundaries. Like, this could get way worse.
Right.
If you're feeling bad about the first 3 episodes, this could go way worse. So that'll definitely be. That's worth bearing in mind if you want to watch this show.
Yeah, I mean, tread lightly with this show. It's not something, you know, yeah, if you're expecting just a little fun 22-minute romp, you're in for something else here. So if you want to check it out, I don't want to discourage you from checking it out, but yeah, be warned, it's heavy, it's bleak, and you're not necessarily going to have tons of fun for the entire time you're watching.
Right, but there are some really fun moments.
Oh yeah.
And some great lines. Kurt Metzger delivers that line when the Republican or the conservative and the liberal are sort of defining their roles and having that debate at the bar. And Metzger says that the world doesn't want to change, and that this country uses democracy like exercise equipment that it bought and then just sits there not doing anything with it. I thought that was great, and I like I like CK. I wrote down the line because I thought it was really funny, but then I didn't write the line that precedes it. But he's talking about, one of the characters is talking about how, it's Steve Buscemi's character, and he's talking about how he's trying to get the most out of his life now that he's gotten older. And CK says, I'm kind of doing the opposite. I'm trying to sleep more and wrap it up.
Right. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, the one line that I wrote down, which I felt like maybe in some ways summarizes what we've seen so far, was when he's talking to Laurie Metcalf and trying to explain to her why it's okay that she's doing this horrible thing, and she turns to him and says, you know, you really have a talent for justifying terrible things. And so I thought, you know what?
Yeah, that's kind of his whole...
Right. Louis C.K. in a nutshell,
Yeah.
right? And this show maybe fits like a mission statement for this show so far. So anyway, but yeah, Horace and Pete, definitely a fascinating look into something. If you want something off the beaten path, something that's not like anything else that's on television right now.
Yeah, you can say what you will about it. That is a claim that no one can refute. It is not like anything else on television.
And I think I'm sure we'll be circling back to this probably to at least at the end and talking about where the season has gone. So. Did you want to touch on any other TV topics here?
Yeah, I had originally brought up sitcoms, but I was thinking that this was a sitcom. So I thought, well, I'll talk a little bit about sitcoms, but we could probably push that to a later date. Although I will ask you this question. When you consider your top 5 television shows of all time, so you're making that really difficult to make a list. I'm not asking you to name those shows, but is there even room for a sitcom in that list?
Yeah, I don't think there is.
I didn't think you'd think there was.
For me.
Called it.
Right. Yeah, I would say...
Wrong answer, because the best show of all time is Mom.
Oh, I forgot about Mom.
Followed by Blackish. Yeah.
So, no, I mean, obviously there are certainly some great sitcoms, certainly have been in the history of television, even that are on today. I don't watch a lot of the traditional 3-camera sitcoms at this point. In fact, I can't think of any off the top of my head. It seems like the ones that I watch that would fit most in the sitcom format tend to be animated things like Archer or Bob's Burgers or things of that nature. You know, and then of course there's the single cam stuff and the dramedies, Girls' Togetherness, et cetera, et cetera.
The huge explosion of dramedies.
Right. But as far as like what you talk about, yeah, the classic, you know, Friends, Seinfeld type of show, I literally can't think of one that I'm watching right now. Maybe I'm just slipping my mind, but yeah, in the history of television, I mean, I don't know. There's just been the explosion of what do you call, you know, premium television in the last 10 years has really focused on dramas, I think, and some of those shows have taken strides beyond what we thought television could be. You know, they kind of redefined what television could be. And so I think those are the shows that, at least at this point, it's hard not to put those on the Mount Rushmore. And those are just kind of edging out the comedies. But I don't know. Do you feel differently?
Well, I don't know. I think that you would have to... I think you would have to retool what a sitcom is. So traditional 3-camera sitcoms, probably not. You know, but there's definitely cases to be made for shows that aren't necessarily doing what a lot of really good shows like Togetherness are doing and blurring that comedy drama line. There are probably shows that can focus way more on the comedy and still be... As a lot of people would probably say that, you know, like Seinfeld should be in the conversation. I wouldn't, but I'm sure that there's something that exists, at least theoretically, that you can make the case for. But it would have to be something different. It would have to do that same thing that premium dramas did. You know, really take advantage of all of the new things we can do with television.
Yeah, I mean, the half-hour space in general in television is kind of fascinating because I feel like that's something that's happening right now. In the half-hour space, people are figuring out different ways to do things with it than what we've seen traditionally. And so maybe we're still in the process of that evolution, and in the next few years we'll really see some things come out of that change our expectations of what that can be and what we thought a half hour of television could be. So I don't know. It's definitely an exciting time. I mean, there's more content than really any one person can absorb, despite your efforts.
I'm trying real hard, man.
But
I'm getting stress boils, trying to keep up with everything.
But it is exciting that because there are so many different options and there's so many different content providers, it allows for a degree of experimentation that is, I think, heretofore unknown. You know, I mean, you just, when you had 3 networks, there's just no way you have space for all these things, for all these weird idiosyncratic types of shows and stuff. I mean, half the things that get made now would never even have gotten ordered to pilot.
Yeah, like the entire idea of Adult Swim,
right?
couldn't have existed, 30 years ago.
So
you would get fired. You'd get laughed out of the room.
yeah. So I mean, you have to appreciate that. You have to appreciate, the new world we live in, where like 2 just random guys can have a podcast where they talk about pop culture. And
it's definitely something that all the choices you have should something you could be optimistic about, almost Hobbesianly optimistic. Segue.
Nicely done. Yeah. So we're talking about. We wanted to talk about with regards to the political world. There's, obviously we've been talking a lot about the primaries. We've been talking a lot about this.
I'm sick of it.
As is everyone else. No, but so we've got. We talked a lot about that over the previous weeks, and of course the primaries continue. We're recording this on a Monday, March 14th.
We're getting it to you early this week, guys.
I know. This is maybe the new schedule here, but tomorrow, Tuesday, the 15th, March 15th, we're going to have quite a few primaries, which could be very pivotal in the election. On the Democratic side, I mean, Hillary and Bernie are still fighting for delegates, but here's the thing: is basically half the remaining delegates to be decided are in only 6 states. The states are California, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio.
Yeah, all those Bernie states.
And 3 of those states are tomorrow, are voting tomorrow. And that's, of course, Illinois, Ohio, and Florida. So the thing for Sanders is he really needs to come out ahead in these states, and he needs to come out ahead by somewhat significant margins in at least several of them. He can't afford to split. I mean, if he splits these states, if they're Michigan-style wins, then, basically Clinton maintains her lead. Picking up a couple delegates here, a couple delegates there is not enough. So given the amount of delegates that are left just among those 6 states, and one of those states, remember, is New York, which is Clinton's home state, the state where she was senator, and the state where her and Bill currently live, so most likely will go to her, then he definitely needs to make some strong moves. The place where he seems to be positioned the strongest of those are those Rust Belt states like Ohio and Illinois. So definitely be watching those tomorrow for Bernie to see if he can pull out somewhat sizable victories there. Then the argument that he's credible going forward becomes much stronger.
Yeah, if everyone on Reddit kills themselves, I'll know that it didn't go well for him.
Yeah, so that's all you really have to do is just watch the suicide watch on Reddit, and you don't even really need to pay attention to CNN or those other outlets. So as far as the Republicans go, really, it's if Trump can win in Florida and Ohio, which are both winner-take-all states on the Republican side, unlike the Democrats.
Then he's going to buy himself a new pair of hands.
That distribute them proportionally. Yeah, he's going to... the biggest, most luxuriant hands.
I gotta hand it to me.
But he'll more or less be unstoppable at that point. So, but the thing is, he's running very tight with Kasich right now in Ohio. So the question is, if he loses there, are we now headed towards a brokered convention? But he actually could still win in Illinois and Missouri, and if he's able to win heavily there and win Florida, then he could still be very much on track for winning the nomination outright. So again, it's really going to come down to, for Trump, he's probably going to have to lose in 2 of those places, or at least he's going to have to lose at least one of Ohio and Florida, and then have a fairly close battle because they do do things by congressional district in those other states in order to be held back. If not, then it looks like the Trump train is full speed ahead to presumably a nomination, barring something crazy.
So Trump takes the general election. He gets what he needs. Next 4 years from now, does the Republican Party adopt superdelegates?
Probably. They have some, but they have very few. They have, I think, only like 125 or something like that, as opposed to the Democratic side, where there's like some 700. So yeah, I think they might see the wisdom of the superdelegates, of having a larger proportion of superdelegates after this election plays itself out. So anyway, we'll see. But yeah, so that's all to be determined tomorrow, and of course I'm sure we'll talk about it next week. What has all gone down with that, but it's setting aside the future potential presidents. We do actually still currently have a president of the United States.
No, we don't, man. Not if he can't appoint somebody to the Supreme Court.
Yes, well, he has, but his domestic powers may be somewhat limited, but Barack Obama is still our president, and he still has enormous power in the foreign policy sphere, and that's something we wanted to talk about today. There was actually an article that came out in The Atlantic that was written by Jeffrey Goldberg, and it's basically a long form profile. It's called The Obama Doctrine. It's available for free online if you just Google The Obama Doctrine Atlantic. I'm sure it'll come right up. It's the top hit, and I would strongly recommend reading it. I think it's...
You really strongly recommended it to me. Basically assigned it to me.
Yeah, I gave you no choice. Said Steve, this is what we're doing on the podcast. But yeah, I mean, ultimately...
The unilateral decision on your part.
Yes, it was. Indeed. I was trying to take a page out of Obama's book here. No, I mean, I think the thing is, like we talked about before, the president is very constrained on domestic matters, and there's a lot of checks and balances, but the Constitution gives the president incredibly broad powers from a foreign policy standpoint. And so, as we're looking at these potential presidential candidates, I think it's instructive to think about them in terms of foreign policy and think about that role in the world that they're going to play if they do indeed end up in the Oval Office. And we can certainly look at that through the prism of our current president and what his foreign policy has been. And that's what this article is, just a really incredible deep dive into the various foreign policy decisions that have been made throughout his 7 years in office, and the consequences of those, and the calculations that went into those, and so on and so forth. It's in some ways it's like it's basically cobbled together from a series of interviews. So it's very heavy on Obama quotes, direct quotes from Obama, given to this author Jeffrey Goldberg. So, but yeah, I think I said it's a fascinating read, and if you care at all about seeing somewhat inside the mind of the commander in chief, I think that you should definitely read it. And what were your takeaways here, Steve?
It's pretty interesting overall. I use that word a lot. If you're playing the take a shot whenever I use the word interesting, if you're doing the drinking game at home, and you'll be completely obliterated. But it is just that. It's something like a 1 billion word article that essentially comes down to, will Obama be remembered as a wise man when it comes to foreign policy? And the answer is we don't know yet. Well, so it's a billion word shoulder shrug. Like,
well, so one of my takeaways from it, and I don't know. Obviously, I'm a supporter of Obama, so certainly there can be some bias here. But it's just really hard for me to think that you could go through, read that article. I mean, read the man's own words and not come away having respect for the thought process, that he puts into this stuff. And whether you agree with the decisions he's made, whether you agree with the individual policy decisions, or even his broader foreign policy philosophy, like, it's hard for me to understand how you couldn't respect that this is someone who is very thoughtful, who's very considered, who's put, an enormous amount of consideration into these sorts of decisions.
Yeah, and someone who's not letting all of the people around him make the decisions for him. He, in fact, throughout the article, goes against... He's surrounded himself with people that may present contrarian ideas, purposefully, I think, and he's really not afraid to pull the trigger. And everyone around him could be telling him one thing, but he'll think it through again and again, and he'll make the decision.
Yeah, or not pull the trigger, which is even more important. I mean, that's one of the things when we were talking on this podcast a few weeks ago, and I was kind of running down the legacy of the Obama administration in sort of it was part of my pitch of how incremental changes or incremental improvements can build up over time. One of the things I talked about was how he, hadn't started any new wars, and that's something that he should get more credit for than perhaps people think. And I think when reading this article, you really see that that's true. How easy it would have been to get involved in more wars, particularly, with Syria.
Yeah, Syria seems to be the crux.
Yeah, it's definitely the way the article starts out is looking at him through the prism of the decision in Syria, the decision to not pursue a more aggressive conflict, a more direct troops on the ground approach, even after the Bashar violated the quote unquote red line of chemical weapons. And that was something he obviously took a lot of heat for in the press.
Yeah, and Goldberg actually presses him on this a fair amount of times. He really makes him plead his case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I ultimately think is a strong case, and I like the fact that, again, that's one of the things I really respected, is the fact that he's able to say, look, I mean, it would be easy to just say, okay, well, everyone's saying, you said this, now you got to follow up on it, even if it's the wrong decision, and to get sucked into that kind of, it's almost like, again,
once you make a statement, you can't change your mind.
It's almost like a schoolyard taunt thing, or something. Like, oh, you can't back down because you said this thing in the schoolyard.
Right. That would make America look weak.
Right. In the prison
do exactly
yard.
What you said.
And it's like, is that really the way that we want to be making decisions? I mean,
that's Obama now. Hello.
You're live on the podcast.
You're live on the Pod Couple. Yeah. Yeah, we've got a call from Colleen. First time caller, long time listener. Oh, she's a huge fan. Okay, well, thanks for being a fan. I'll get back to you in a little while. Okay, bye. There it is.
Yeah.
Nothing more exciting than live podcasting.
Yeah, well, you know what? The fans are clamoring for the Pod Couple so bad that we can't even get one under our belts without them calling us up and singing our praises on the phone. So
it's true. They love our gross incompetence.
But yeah, as far as making that, like I said, is that how we want to be making our decisions? Is who doesn't back down out of a schoolyard fight or something? If when all the other circumstances surrounding the decision point to it being a mistake, do we want to be sucked into it? And I think that's something that is surprising, how many people are like, oh no, you still got to do it. You said this.
He references the Washington playbook.
Right. Yeah.
It's sort of standard for how it's done. And that's like one of the primary rules in the Washington playbook is once you announce a decision, you absolutely have to go through with it. And Obama makes a really good point. Damn, my shit's blowing up. Shit's blowing up like Syria.
Do you not have like a button to silence the phone? Or?
I don't know. You can't silence this thing. Look at this brick. So, yeah, Obama makes a good case that you are actually what makes America seem the strongest is not just saying, hey, we can go in with the military. It's when you don't need the military to accomplish goals that actually confers power. Yeah.
And I think, like I said, the thing for me is, you said, well, we don't know some of these things are going to be determined or left to the judgment of history. And of course, that's always the case with this stuff, and so for me, that's why it comes down to saying all these decisions ultimately are incredibly complicated. There's not a clear cut, oh, well, you should just do this, you should just do that. And so therefore, like, given the nature of these complicated decisions, who do you want to be making them? And do you want somebody who is very thoughtful and very calculating and who's going to look at all the pros and cons and try to weigh them out in very carefully? Because what more can you do in a situation like this? In these types of situations where there are no easy answers, and where everything is drenched in shades of gray, I don't think you can ask for anything more. And so that's the things that makes me feel very positive about Obama, and again, his process. It's like, it's not about results, it's about process. Even if some of the results are wrong, if you go through the proper process, then it's like, okay, I can excuse the results. It's when the process is broken. Like, for example, I think what we saw in the run-up to the Iraq War, where it's hard to excuse the results. So,
true, but conversely, you could make the argument, and people have, that all of this thinking, all of this sort of what the article calls Spockish behavior, leads to inaction, which leads to more devastating results. ISIS specifically, Syria being a hotbed of ISIS production, so there are certainly...
Well, yeah, you can argue that the inaction is the result, or it's the result of inaction, but I think it's just as easy to argue that it's the result of action, in the other states that have been destabilized by American military adventurism it contributed just as much to the rise of ISIS as any inaction on the part of Syria, and had there been action in Syria that would have further destabilized that region. That's the whole problem here. Is it's not a choice of, okay, do we go in and then it's expensive or hard or whatever, but at the end of the day everything is like unicorns and rainbows, or is it, do we not make these can make this commitment and then let things be bad? That's not the choice. Of course the choice is ultimately, even if we do go in and we spend enormous amounts of blood and treasure, things still often are terrible. Obama makes that exact point in Libya. He says, this is his quote, he says, "So we actually executed this plan as well as I could have expected. We got a UN mandate, we built a coalition, and it cost us $1 billion, which when it comes to military operations is very cheap. We averted large-scale civilian casualties, we prevented what almost surely would have been a prolonged and bloody civil conflict. And despite all that, Libya is still a mess."
Your Obama is about as good as my Daniel Plainview.
Well, we'll get into that a little later. But you know what I mean? So it's like, that's I think is one of the things that's underappreciated here is the choice is often positioned as, oh, well, we can go in and do all this good, or we can not go in and allow evil to continue. And those really aren't the two options. It's much, again, it's much more gray than that. Going in is no guarantee of good outcomes, and we've seen that. I think the Bush foreign policy demonstrated that about as starkly as it can be demonstrated.
Right. So that is one thing I was wondering when I was reading the article. Do you worry that part of what Obama's doing is being a little overprotective of his legacy because the Bush thing was such a mess? And that's why he's not making as many actions. Like, is it better to just go for the gusto? Like, we respect filmmakers and artists that take chances, but we say almost the opposite of military leaders or of politicians, world leaders.
Well, I don't think that, the thing is, I don't think that Obama is unwilling to go for it when he sees that it's
a clear and present danger.
Right, exactly. This is from the article. It says, but once he decides a particular challenge represents a direct national security threat, he has shown a willingness to act unilaterally. This is one of the larger ironies of the Obama presidency. He has relentlessly questioned the efficacy of force, but he has also become the most successful terrorist hunter in the history of the presidency, one who will hand his successor a set of tools an accomplished assassin would envy.
True, but I think it's also easy to be the most successful terrorist hunter when you've got the most terrorists. You know, it's fish in a barrel.
But you see what I'm saying. I mean, I think that I don't think you can argue that he has been reticent to act when it was a clear national security threat. I don't think that. I think that you can certainly make the argument, as is made in this article by the man himself, that Syria did not, represent a clear and present national security threat. Is it, is it bad that people are using chemical weapons? Sure, but ultimately, they used, through diplomatic means, they were able to achieve the destruction of those chemical weapons anyway, shortly after that incident. And they were able to do that in cooperation with the Russians. So is that not a better outcome than sending troops in? And
well, we shall see. The Obama himself says, look, there are greater threats, greater ways to move forward than the Middle East. He, in this article, it's pretty clear, is exasperated with the Middle East as a whole. Mm-hmm. So he'll admit that something like climate change is very important. And that's all well and good. But with the Syrian for a guy that thinks about everything from all angles, you look at the Syrian refugee crisis and how that can destabilize not just Europe, but then as goes Europe, so the rest of the world, potentially. So, and the article asked this question, and I wanted to know your answer. Do you think that, or what do you think constitutes an actual imminent threat to the United States?
Well, I mean, I think obviously probably the number one imminent threat to the United States, has been and continues to be nuclear proliferation. And I think that everything that can be done to rein in that, for example, the Iran nuclear deal that was struck earlier, is the type of thing that I want to be seeing, as the number one priority from any foreign policy administration. Talk about rounding up loose nuclear material in former Soviet states. I mean, all those sorts of things. Anything that's basically trying to keep that genie in the bottle as much as it possibly can be. I think that's the clearest existential threat in the short term. Obviously, beyond that, you have, groups, terrorist groups, Al Qaeda, and groups of that nature that whatever plots they're making certainly need to be, disrupted, and the intelligence needs to be gathered on those to keep tabs on anyone who might be, attempting to strike it, directly at American interests in that way. I think those are probably the two most clear ones, but yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, from the standpoint of, a direct, like, army challenging us, there isn't anybody really who's in a position to do that, right now in the world, and that's not a threat, So it is more these asymmetrical things that we have to look at. So, I mean, there's plenty of threats out there for sure. There's just, and I don't mean to underplay them by any means, but the question is, is the right response to those threats, traditional, like 100,000 troops on the ground sort of response? And I think it's, in my mind, it's pretty clear that that's not the right response for the majority of the problems that we face today.
Well said.
So, I don't know. One thing I feel like this is sort of maybe the top level summary of Obama's worldview that came out of this article. I think it's another direct quote, so I wanted to drop this and just see what your general reaction is. He says, "I also believe the world is a tough, complicated, messy, mean place, full of hardship and tragedy. And in order to advance both our security interests and those ideals and values that we care about, we've got to be hard-hearted at the same time as we're big-hearted, and pick and choose our spots, and recognize there are going to be times where the best we can do is to shine a spotlight on something that's terrible, but not believe that we can automatically solve it. There are going to be times where our security interests conflict with our concerns about human rights. There are going to be times when we can do something about innocent people being killed, but there are going to be times where we can't.
Yeah, that's basically it. This one thing you definitely get from the article is, I'm glad I'm not president. Seems like a shitty job, man. You basically are having to make calls like that all the time. I mean, there's a big... Obama talks about the 4 boxes of the four types of foreign policy ideas, and he tries, and the author's trying to pin him down, and even starting from there, there's very basic questions you have to ask yourself. Should we, at any given time, if we see an injustice in the world, try to step in and fix it? Because that's not really feasible. But then how do you pick and choose? Yeah, it's a lot to take in, man. And I think that's probably what comes through in the article, again, for me, is what a rational, measured guy Obama is. And as you said, that's the kind of guy I want with his finger on the button.
So you would
the guy least likely to press the button.
So you'd rather have someone like that, and not, like, for example, a bloviating gas bag with incredibly thin skin and a hair trigger temper.
Well, no, when you put it that way, I'm rethinking this whole thing. Just get me an ass kicker. Yeah. Yeah, we got a ton of drones. Let's just drone.
Trump, did you read this article? Are you sure you want this job? You could just go back and do another season of The Apprentice. I mean, it'd be a lot easier. So.
It's going to get the biggest ratings ever once he does. Just not in Mexico.
Yeah. So, anyway, I don't know. Do you have any other parting thoughts on this article?
Nothing that strikes me at the moment.
Okay.
Fantastic read. Makes me think maybe if books ever come back and become a thing again, I might check one out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As
for now, I'll stay online.
Just stick to the Reddit comment section.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's probably.
Yeah,
probably
I kept looking for a summary of this article, and there wasn't one, so I had to read the whole damn thing.
Oh, sorry about that. But yeah, all right. Well, anyway, check it out. The Obama Doctrine by Jeffrey Goldberg. It's in the Atlantic. You can read it online, you can find out a lot of what. If you're wondering about a lot of the decisions that have been made and really wondering what the thought process was behind them, this is a great insight into that.
You do get a feeling that Washington is very much like the person that has sort of the most accurate representation of it is Iannucci, the guy behind Veep.
Yeah, I've heard that.
This is a serious article with serious subject matter,
right?
But you can tell there's like the president being diplomatic and being very articulate about something, and then you find out there's a lot of the behind the scenes stuff where he just calls Libya a shit show,
right?
So
yeah. Well, that's something I've actually heard from. There have been various political experts that have talked about Veep and how it's more accurate than you really would want to believe.
Yeah.
A lot of Washington Insider type people have said, when you look at a show, people think that Washington's more like House of Cards, but it's really much more like Veep. So,
have you seen In the Loop?
I haven't.
The movie? Yeah, that's what I kept thinking about the whole time when I was reading this article, too, because it's very much about that specific event, like trying to prevent a war, essentially, and all of the ideas that bounce back and forth and how crazy and hectic everything is. Highly recommended. It's on Netflix. Check it out.
And that is In the Loop, not this article.
Correct.
Okay. You'll have me reading this article to you on Netflix. That'll be up next week.
You read like at least a good 2% of the article. So
yeah. So if that was that whetted your taste buds, then you have more to look forward to next week.
If you want more of this Goldberg fire.
Okay. So let's move on to Oceans of Oil, which are on fire then. And, see what I did there?
I did. I love it.
Okay. And that is the film There Will Be Blood, which is The next in our director series here, Paul Thomas Anderson, film number 5, and this is a film, of course, which is set in, it starts in 1898 and it goes through, I believe, 1927, and it stars Daniel Day-Lewis.
Exclusively, almost.
Yeah, who, I don't know, he's okay, I guess. It's like every once in a while a guy can do a decent bit of acting. It's interesting because this movie, we watched, like I said, the so far the catalog of Anderson, and you watch those first 3 movies from Hard 8 through Magnolia, and it does feel like he's, it's an evolution of a style that kind of culminates in Magnolia. And then he takes this really wild right turn with Punch Drunk Love, which we talked about last week, which is very different. And now...
Then he recorrects the wheel.
Well, but I wouldn't even say that. I would say that it seems like it feels to me like he's now saying, this is a period where he's saying, I want to see if I can make different kinds of movies. So he made the Paul Thomas Anderson, quote unquote kind of movie with those first 3. And now it's like Punch Drunk Love is something very different. But now this is very different too. It's him saying, okay, can I make a historical epic now?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, this movie.
Yeah, I said recorrects. I meant overcorrects.
Okay.
So he goes exactly in the opposite direction of Punch Drunk Love.
Yeah. Okay. So, but that's, but it does feel like that's almost like his thing now is to see like, well, can I do these different things? I know I can do this one thing and I can do it really well. So let me branch out. And so obviously Punch Drunk Love was the first of those. And now comes this movie, which, personally, I mean, I think this movie is great. I don't know if the fact that what you just said, like, corrects too far in the wrong direction makes me think that maybe you're not a big fan of it.
I think this is a fantastic movie. It's a masterpiece. That being said, it's my least favorite of the Paul Thomas Anderson movies, going back to this revisitation. And the reason is very simple. It's a movie about not very good people. There are no heroes. And it's about the worst in humanity and the worst of capitalism and the worst of religion. And it's just a fucking bummer. It's like the exact reason I love Punch Drunk Love. Like, this is a marvel of cinematography. Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano are both fantastic. I mean, that goes without saying. But ultimately, I just don't want to watch it again.
You find it to be a hard watch?
Yeah, and not in the way that, like, something along the lines of Dear Zachary or In the Bedroom is like an emotional roller coaster. This is just a descent into madness. Like, this is a straight line down, and by the end of it, I don't feel like I've enriched my soul in any particular way.
Yeah.
That said, you should definitely see it once. Like, if you haven't seen this movie, go out and see it.
Yeah, I think for me, it's such a fascinating character study that maybe that just carries the day for me to where I don't...
The Daniel Day?
It carries the Daniel Day for me. I mean, so obviously, he is a tour de force in this movie, as he tends to be in most of the films that he does, but, he's so magnetic. I mean, he's so, the movie's built around him, and I think that's something, again, that's very different from the earlier Anderson movies where you have these ensemble casts, and we saw him move away from that with Punch Drunk Love, but this is almost a whole different thing because Lewis...
Yeah, this is Anderson going, can I win a guy an Oscar?
Right. And he consumes the movie in a way that only an actor of the caliber of Daniel Day-Lewis can do it. I mean, Adam Sandler, for whatever his merits are as an actor, is certainly not anywhere on the same plane of existence. Right. And he cannot, consume an entire film in this way. I think he obviously, he reckoned, I think that PTA recognized that he had that in Lewis and rightly built the film around him.
Yeah, he loved him so much that he decided to leave Philip Seymour Hoffman out of this movie. Which is another reason why it's my least favorite.
Yeah, well, in fact, I don't think anybody from Anderson group appears in this film, right? I mean,
no, he worked with everybody. He hadn't worked with any of these people before,
right.
from what I've read, with the exception of, what's his name? Paul F. Tompkins.
Oh,
Paul
okay.
F. Tompkins has like a minor line in a minor scene, and he was originally in Magnolia, but got left on the cutting room floor.
Oh, really?
So
Wow.
he still doesn't make an appearance, but he had worked with
Tough
PTA
times for
before.
Mr. Peanut Butter, huh?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, so, I mean, as far as this movie, one thing, that, going through, obviously it's always interesting. This is my third time through it, and it's always interesting as you watch these movies to see, the things you notice that you haven't seen in prior iterations. And so one of the things that I'm really surprised I hadn't noticed before is how much the opening of the film is an homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey, because that's obviously one of my favorite movies, and so I expect it would have hit me before, but I mean, really, I mean, from the way, from the silent film quality, the almost dialogue-free opening, the way that the landscapes are shot in these sort of almost like still photograph fashion. We have the swelling music that's very reminiscent of the music around the monologue,
And sets the tone right away as this is not going to be a fun ride.
Right. Like I said, this swelling music that's very much like what we see with the monolith in 2001, and then even down to when he finally strikes oil and raises the oily hand to the sky. I mean, it's there's just so many beats that hit the sort of mirror what we've seen in 2001, and I'm like, oh, okay, he obviously wanted to make an opening that did. This is obviously 2001 is obviously a film that he loves, and he's talked about Kubrick before many times, and how Kubrick did everything basically you can do in film, and where everyone's following in his footsteps, and so yeah, I think that you can see him making a very deliberate choice to follow in his footsteps there. So is that something that you thought about watching it?
Well, I hadn't thought about it when watching it this time, but it makes sense. Checks out with me. It just seems like the opening is a man in a hole, and what struck me was he never gets out of that hole. Mm-hmm. He just always digs himself deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it establishes so much right at the very beginning. Like you said, he's by himself, and ultimately the movie is about a man who is really incapable of making connections with other human beings, and who. But it also establishes, he has that in that opening scene when he breaks his leg or whatever as he falls into the hole, but he manages to crawl out and make sure he gets his gold to the shop or whatever where they weigh it, and it's just like that kind of indomitable will that I will not be stopped from my goal to make money. And that's, again, this is like what we talked about before with other movies, is how he's able to establish so quickly, this in almost right when you see his character, it's like, this is who the character is at its core.
Yeah.
Somebody who is, a loner, who is incapable of forming human relationships, and who will not be stopped, who has an indomitable will. And I mean, that just plays out over the next 2 hours or so of this movie.
And Daniel Day-Lewis is amazing, even just swinging a pickaxe, He just does it with such authenticity. It's amazing.
Yeah. He probably worked in a quarry for 6 months.
I wouldn't be surprised. I heard that he prepped for this movie for a year.
Wow.
So the work going into it really shows. Interestingly enough, Paul Dano's character was... he was only supposed to play one of the brothers, the one that we see initially, whose name might be Paul. I can't remember right now. It was Eli and...
Yeah, it is Eli and Paul, correct.
Paul. So he was supposed to play Paul, and they had cast another actor for Eli, who then PTA replaced and gave and decided to make them twins. And he gave Dano basically 4 days notice that suddenly his part was going to be, the second largest one in the movie. So that's pretty interesting. A shout out to him for doing that well without having a year to prep.
Yeah, yeah, he's fantastic in this film, and I think that's something I was actually going to ask you about. Is that because I never totally understood the Eli Paul dynamic, and it felt in many ways to me almost like it was a schizophrenic thing, and that it was possible that Paul and Eli didn't exist as separate people, but it sounds like.
Well, I don't know how it was. I mean, it was originally written as two separate people, but maybe that's what Anderson was after. That was definitely something that occurred to me the very first time I saw the film, was that maybe that, not knowing exactly how it was going to end up, maybe this was some kind of long con type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is at the very end of the film where Daniel Plainview says essentially, "Oh, Paul, took the money. He was a smart one. He went and has his own wells now," and that makes it sound like they're separate people. But I even thought that could be sort of a metaphorical type of him saying, "That's what you could have done with the money. If you had done that, you would be in this better position. But instead, you chose to." Put your...
Yeah, because there's no evidence that actually happened, right?
Right.
Like, Plainview is just being as cruel as he can.
Right.
He's a monster, right?
Right. So let's talk about, him being a monster. Because one thing that struck me as I was watching this film is even though, he's, as you say, pretty irredeemable as a human being, I still found myself rooting for him at times. And this is something that we see.
Well, you're a cold-hearted, cynical bastard, Kyle. Of course you did.
Is that the reason why? So, but I think we see this in a number of things, a number of shows and movies and whatever. So where I feel like for some reason we as human beings excuse a certain amount of moral repugnance in exchange for a certain amount of competence. So,
sure.
for example, with Mad Men, the character of Don Draper, this is one that comes to mind. Basically does a lot of things which are very morally questionable. Not a great guy, but is very good at his job as an ad man, and we find ourselves constantly rooting for him, to do well at that job, or again letting things slide, being like, well, shouldn't be cheating on his wife, but he's pretty cool the way he strides into that office. And,
Also, I think that probably viewing either this movie or that show through the context of history allows you to forgive them a little bit more. I mean, this is a guy, Plainview, that we don't know anything about his life before he's in that hole, really. We know very little about his past, and we assume that it was not the easiest childhood. It was not the easiest world for him growing up, which I think allows you a little more space to root for the guy, because he, if nothing else, has made a success. I mean, he gets exactly what he wants in this movie.
Yeah. Does he get exactly what he wants?
Yeah, well, I think so.
You think so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I actually think you could make the case that this is this is my hot take. This is my hot take for the week, Kyle.
Fire!
This you could make the case is actually Paul Thomas Anderson's darkest comedy.
Okay.
Because it's one long setup to a perfect joke, which is the ending song, the ending music after he murders a guy, then says, "I'm finished," and then this really bright, springy, stringy music. So like the happiest music we've heard in the entire movie is right after he's beaten a man to death. And I feel like part of what Anderson's doing, perhaps, is playing a joke on the audience, being like, haha, you had to sit through that.
That's pretty
it's a hot take.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I've never looked at it that way before, but that's a pretty convoluted scheme on the part of Anderson to make a whole film just
yeah, but come on,
for that one payoff. But yeah, probably
I was
worth
actually reminded of that. What got me thinking of that was that third episode of Horace and Pete. It's sort of like that long, dramatic,
right.
sort of arduous journey, and then that funny little joke at
right.
the end. Outright hilarious joke with Alan Alda.
That's true. So another question I have, we talked about the sort of the question about Paul and Eli and what's the reality there. Another thing that I think you can ask what the reality is with Daniel's relationship with HW, his son, his adopted son, which, of course, unbeknownst to HW himself, that he's not the biological son of Daniel. But, we see at times him appear to have genuine affection for HW. But at other times, it very much appears that he's a pawn of convenience. And so my question is, do you come away from it feeling that that there was ever any true feelings for HW, or that like it was always a con?
That's a difficult question, man, because I can see it from both ways, and I thought about that. In general, when I think about this movie, I think a lot of people will say that Plainview is a sociopath, but there are elements to this performance which I think it's a little more nuanced than that. And that perhaps he is a sociopath, but it doesn't actually strike true to me. And I think that if he was, he wouldn't be as convincing as an actor. Because if he's a sociopath version of Daniel Day-Lewis, who's so committed to the bit, but perhaps inside feels nothing. I think that this is just a guy that gets angrier, sees what he wants, and it whittles away his soul throughout the thing. But I don't think that he's completely 100% lost or incapable. You see that when he has he's reading the book, the diary, after finding out that his brother actually died a while ago. He goes back, and that's like I think that's the only time in the movie he, like, honestly, and because there's no other audience around, it's just us, like, that he's crying when he's reading that. This doesn't strike me as like a sociopath's behavior. So probably the relationship with HW, I think by the end of it, he's certainly done. Their whole exchange, I think that's cemented in him. But also by the end of it, he's just drinking vodka straight out of the bottle by like the fifth. So when I say he gets what he wants, I mean he gets what he set out to get.
Right. But yeah, and I think that's the ultimate commentary here, right? Is that when you set out to get, have this sort of success, this capitalist cutthroat success at all costs, that the part of the cost of that is destroying every human relationship in your life. And I think, including the one that was of the most value to him, which was his son. And I do believe that he did have genuine affection for him. I think that that's something that that they established through a few different shots. There's the one where he's cradling him, after the accident that makes him lose his hearing, and he's kind of the way he's rubbing his hair and sort of trying to shush him and console him. That's not the action of somebody who feels nothing for somebody. But by the same token, that scene is very pivotal because, you see him rush to the aid of HW, in this sort of dramatic fashion, rescue him, bring him back to the little staging house or whatever. But then he leaves him to go out.
It's a very calculated move.
Right. And go out and, attend to this well. And one of the lines here, which, as he says, he turns to his partner and says, there's a whole ocean of oil under there and it's all mine. And he's almost gleeful about it. And the line, but I think the line just prior to that, he just says, how's HW? And he says, oh, like, he's not good. But then he goes on to say, so it's like, where's his priorities here? You see the priorities established very clearly in this scene that, yes, he may care for HW and, he may have be concerned about him on some level, but clearly the most important thing that's happened here is that they've struck oil.
Yeah, and that's that idea of his misaligned priorities comes up time and time again throughout the film. There's when he first meets Paul's character and he asks him what church he goes to, you can tell like he's uncomfortable with the idea when everyone asks him about his wife. He's always like moving on from that. Like he just wants to sit there and talk about the oil and maintain that focus. He says about religion that he likes all religion and that he goes, he doesn't go to a particular church, but he likes all churches. It's very clear that he doesn't understand why those things are important to people, and it makes him uncomfortable.
Right. Well, and I also got the impression that for me, it's that he's going, I don't want to alienate anybody because,
Sure.
Ultimately all I care about is
it's a sales pitch.
Making a deal. So I don't want to say, oh, I'm Baptist. And then, it turns out these people are Presbyterian and I lose the oil lease as a result of that. So it's a calculated move in that regard, for sure. And the wife thing, I assume too, is I assume there even was no wife. Because, of course, he says the wife gave birth to HW and died in childbirth. So I'm assuming that he never had a wife of any kind.
No, it's interesting for a guy to be like that focused. It didn't really occur to me, but he has there's no lusting after anyone or even like the idea of a romance in this movie, is there? That's crazy.
Yeah.
For a movie to be this long.
Well, like I said, I mean, the only romance we have, of course, is between HW and the girl, the Sunday girl. But yeah, for him, I think that's the part of the thing is it's all consuming the lust after this capitalist success, this the oil and making money and ultimately defeating the rivals is because it's less, to me it feels like it's less about even making money per se than it's about beating other people, and we see that in small and large ways throughout. There's the scenes where it's like he consistently has to big dog, the other people. And we see that with the scene with Paul, or with Eli, where, Eli asked to do the dedication on the oil well, and he sets him up, to make sure that he shows him up and doesn't allow him to do it. And then later, I think it might even be in that same scene, but where he's sitting there at the table with the daughter, and he says, "Oh, your father doesn't beat you anymore, does he? Right? Because that if he does that, like I'll make sure I take care of it." And then the dad's sitting like 2 feet away. Clearly it's saying it for his benefit, but it's just that again, it's that alpha dog like, I'm going to throw my weight around and what the fuck are you going to do about it kind of attitude that he displays consistently. He has to be top dog. He has to be the one who is setting the agenda at all times. And even when he's put in a position where he can't do that, there's still a long game that he's playing to get back to. He hasn't forgotten about it. And I think we see that obviously the most startling example of that is at the end, when it's been how many years, 20 years, 25 years since, Eli sort of got the better of him with that baptism scene. And he's clearly been hanging on to it for this entire time and planning his revenge. And obviously certainly takes advantage of that. So, anyway, let's move on to favorite scenes and favorite lines. Do you want to go first here?
Sure. Well, a lot of great lines in this movie, obviously, that all belong to Daniel Day-Lewis, so you can take your pick. But I think my favorite, for the sake of brevity, is in that last scene, when he's sort of just attacking Eli verbally before attacking him physically. He's just trying to break him down so much. Like, he wants to emotionally destroy him completely before he kills him. And he says, "You slithered out of your mother's filth." My Plainview impression, I worked on it last night, but it only sounded like Bane. So I was like, "You slithered out of your mother's filth." Not great.
That sounded like a decrepit Bane.
Yeah. It was maskless.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, and you're saying you chose that just because you feel like it really shows like his depth of wanting to destroy somebody and take them down. He's willing to say you were nothing from the moment you arrived. Mm-hmm. You were worse than nothing because there's already a better version of you out there. Right. Slithering, that imagery of slithering out of your mother's filth. Is like, I'm going to insult your mom. I'm going to insult you. Yeah, it's great. Well, the line that I chose is when he has first gone to the church of the Third Revelation and seen Eli perform an exorcism to get the arthritis, as he says, out of the old woman's hands. And that after the whole thing is done, and they kind of have a conversation at the doorway, and Plainview turns to him and says, "Well, that was one goddamn hell of a show." He walks away. And I think it's just, it's so interesting to me, because the reason I chose it is because it really is like one con man, respect. It's a game, respect game, It's one con man acknowledging another, saying, "Look, I know this drill. I do this myself. This is the same. It's just another variation of what I do with the oil leases." And pulling this con. So you may be able to fool these people, but you're not fooling me. And that really sets the tone for the adversarial relationship, which goes through this whole film all the way up to the end, the scene that you took your quote from. And I feel like that's really where he takes it, to him saying, okay, like in that scene, I feel like Daniel's whole objective is to say, I'm going to prove once and for all that I'm right, and that you and I are no different. You're just as much of a con man as I am.
Right, and he does that with that line in such a succinct way that also in a movie that's rife with religious iconography, he also flat out, not only does he acknowledge him as a con man, but he's rejecting religion. Man, these creditors keep finding me. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so, well, I guess we'll just keep on going through these phone calls here.
Yeah, hopefully it's not someone that wants to get on the air.
Yeah,
that was a bit, people.
We've had we've had a lot of action on the phones here. People burning it up. Maybe they're trying to make a.
I need your arms around me. I need to feel your touch.
Yeah, they're trying to make donations. It's not the pledge drive time, people. That doesn't come till later. We'll do that around Easter. So, all right. What else? What else we want to talk about? Scenes here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, what is your scene? I'll let you go first again.
Well, I feel like the best scene of the movie, and the thing that, the whole direction that the movie moves is really leading up to that final confrontation.
Yeah.
So that would be my choice, but I thought maybe you would take that one.
Well, yeah, I kind of did the same thing.
Okay.
The final scene is so strong.
Yeah.
That, yeah, you almost, how could you not pick as your favorite scene? But I think we both went a different direction for that very reason. So anyway, final scene is amazing, though. I will say about the final scene, one of the things that I really like about it is the way that he's gnawing on the bones, and he's sort of hunched over, and it really just gives you that impression that he's almost lazily picking at them like a lion or like some kind of apex predator. And I think that's in that scene that establishes so much that this is who he is. He is an apex predator. He's he has to.
Yeah, he's a big cat, sort of toying with his prey.
Right, and he has to be the king of the jungle. That's ultimately the whole point of his existence, is to dominate all rivals in this way. And so that visual is so interesting at the end. So I did like that. So I'll mention that about that final scene before we move on to whatever other scenes we picked here. Did you have anything else on that scene before?
It's fantastic, that idea of toying with him, sort of even foreshadowing his inevitable murder of Eli by tossing the pins at him, just earlier in that scene.
Right.
He's just it's like he's already made up his mind. He knows exactly what's going to happen, and he's just he's having as much fun with it as he can. And I love that the last line is, "I'm finished." The last line of the film, "I'm finished," which could mean which I immediately take to mean he's finished with his quest and the movie's over. But also he could say, if you're of the belief that he did not get what he wanted, then now that this is done, now that he has no more lands to conquer, and he weeps before he has no more lands to conquer, right?
Right.
So
That's how I take it.
You could take it like that, so you took it like that. Okay, interesting. Yeah, it was a fucking great scene, man. Did you have a different one you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. Well, like I said, the scene that I actually chose is the baptism.
Damn it!
Scene.
That's my backup scene. I knew it. I knew we were going to do it.
Well, I have a third backup scene, so I'll let you talk about the baptism.
Okay, the backup scene or the baptism scene. I'm talking about when Eli has the upper hand.
Yes.
In the church, right?
Yes.
So that's such an interesting juxtaposition because you really get to see how, one, Daniel Day-Lewis going through the motions of playing a character that's playing a character that's playing a character. I mean, there's some really nested acting in there. And there are moments when, like, I've abandoned my boy, doing different iterations of that. Like, maybe he really feels it for one moment, and maybe this time it's for show, and sort of all of the nuance, the entire, like... Again, it's that Laurie Metcalf thing. Like, do this scene, and you'll know whether or not you're an actor.
Right.
And it's really interesting to see Eli actually have the upper hand, and how Anderson has set it up that you know that even though he's enjoying having that dominance over Daniel in this scene, you know it's not going to last for him.
Yeah, I mean I love the way that they hold on Daniel Day-Lewis's face, and again you see all these waves of different things happening, and they come. You see the anger and the frustration, and as he's being pushed to different limits, and the resignation, and it just keeps coming in these waves that just roll across his face, and they're all have nothing to do with the words he's saying. All the things that are happening in his eyes and in the muscles in his jaw and all of this stuff, and it's just kind of incredible. Again, it's one of those things that as a student of acting or whatever, it's like, yeah, just sit down and watch that a few times through, to get an idea of what you can strive for. So that's pretty incredible. And the same thing, you see some of the stuff in Paul Dano's face too. I love the pleasure he's taking in, that he can't even restrain, really. It's coming, even though he doesn't want to show it. It's like seeping out at the edges.
There is this idea that his sort of job is to just whip people up into a frenzy, but now he's actually succeeded in whipping himself up in that moment. Right. Yeah.
So that's a great scene. And another great scene that I chose.
You came prepared, man. Thank God. Thank God one of us knows what he's doing. Hold on, I got to take a phone call.
You need to step out. The scene is on the beach with his supposed brother Henry, which turns out to not be his brother. The whole Henry plotline is actually pretty interesting, and we haven't really touched on it very much. But right away, Daniel, the whole idea of Daniel being a con man is something that we see throughout this whole film. We've talked about. And this is another aspect of it. When he first meets Henry, he sees him and he immediately is suspicious. He has that con man suspicion that everybody, else is a con man too. We've seen he already immediately pegs Eli as a con man, but it's the same thing. It's like he doesn't even know this guy, but the first time he sees him, he won't even get close to him physically. I mean, he stands at a distance and starts asking him questions, and he's suspecting that he's after something, which turns out to be true. His instincts are incorrect in this sense, but anyway, for a while he actually is fooled and does believe that he's genuinely his brother, because he gives him some information that seems like only his brother would know, and but then they're on this beach together. Where they've explored where the end of the pipeline will be, and they're sitting there, and he says to him, like, "Oh, we should get some women." The brother says we should get some women, and then Daniel says, "Oh yeah, we should, maybe take him to the Peachtree Dance," and that's obviously something from their youth, their hometown, the Peachtree Dance, something that he would know about, and it's clear that the brother doesn't catch the reference, and right there's the look in his eyes. Again, it's such a subtle thing, and it's like, as an actor, you're just so impressed to say, like, wow, like, it's crazy that, like, if you were asked to do that, you could see you overplaying it in so many different ways, so easily, just making your eyes way too slitty or yeah,
I would have been like,
or too surprised or whatever. You just there's something, there's a way that he's able to completely internalize it, but you feel like everything, the entire weight of the realization that he has in that moment, with that one look. And then but then the part that I think that puts it over the top for me, that scene, is that when he goes in the ocean by himself, and I feel like in that scene, I feel like what's happening is you can almost sense that the last vestiges of any faith he had in humanity are being drained from him into that ocean as he's in there by himself, once again by himself, because he's always a man alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that relationship with his brother, that was sort of the last gasp of any kind of humanity that he was going to have. And it's ruined there. And as it kind of fades away into the salt water, he just floats along. And that's the turning point for him, really becoming, turning into the darkest step of his descent into madness, as you say. So anyway, that's my...
It's a great choice.
Scene there. So yeah.
Great actor. A movie full of energy, but devoid of joy. Interestingly enough, you had commented on how drab the locations were in Punch Drunk Love versus how colorful the earlier movies were. And there are some great sweeping wide shots, but this is by far like the drabbest movie. There's almost, with the exception of like the way fire is handled in the movie, there's like no color to this movie whatsoever.
Yeah, it is very drained of color, you're right. That's true. And even the end, when you see his house, which is obviously a very expensive house and full of, he's got his own bowling alley and, it's full of various expensive furniture and whatnot, but it definitely has that Citizen Kane feel of, it's a mausoleum basically. And it's something that, this man who's gained everything and lost everything at the same time. So
There Will Be Blood. Where does it rank for you?
I don't know. That's really hard. I would say it's right up there. I would say it's probably third, after Boogie Nights and Magnolia, but yeah, it's just such a different thing, from those movies. But it's hard to do the definitive ranking, I think, at this point. But yeah, so definitely a good one. Next week, we're moving on to The Master. Yeah,
which is going to be my first time watching it. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be my second time. I'll be really interested to hear your first impressions here. Of course, we're back with Philip Seymour Hoffman back in the fold, and I think maybe a few other of the stalwarts from Anderson, although there's not too many. I mean, the other primary actor in the film is Joaquin Phoenix, who hadn't appeared in any prior films, although he's obviously the lead in Inherent Vice. So, and I'm trying to remember who else is. I think Amy Adams is in The Master, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the reason I avoided this movie for so long is because of my experience with There Will Be Blood and it feeling, like a drain on my soul. Like it just, I just got the impression that once again we're doing sort of a period piece here that's going to follow in the footsteps of that. It didn't seem as much from the trailers and whatnot as a departure or a return to form. So, but I am interested in checking it out. So.
Yeah, well, as I think I mentioned when we first started talking about doing this in episode 1,
you said it's a fucking mess. You said it's like a fabulous failure.
I think it's an interesting failure. But yeah, I don't love the movie. But like I said, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to revisit it, because I didn't love it the first time through. So, and of course I'll be interested to see your views as well. And we'd be interested to hear from your views as our listeners. So if you
feel free to give us a call.
Yeah, we're taking phone calls, obviously, but we're also taking tweets at the Pod Couple. That's PODD. So at the Pod Couple, you can tweet us. Of course, you also can subscribe to this very podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or Blueberry. So go ahead and do that as well.
I like we're breaking the mold because typically in a podcast you would give them all this information up front, but we waited until
I want to make sure you're invested. I want to make sure you're invested.
Hour and a half into this.
Yeah, I don't want.
We don't want just like their casual listener tweeting. We don't want to hear that.
Flash in the pan. They're just checking it out for 5 minutes. Forget about that. Yeah, only the hardcore people that are going to stick around should be tweeting us. Okay, so let's move on then to music. And if you want to teach me about modern versions thereof.
Yeah, I wanted something sort of to thematically fit what I felt was a podcast I saw taking shape as about perhaps interesting failures or things that don't entirely work. So there are, as fabulous as Horace and Pete are, there are some problems with it, as well constructed and well acted and well shot as There Will Be Blood. It sort of left me wanting more, and so I wanted to choose this band, which does fit in with a theme that I've been doing for the past couple shows. So feel free to tweet your guesses on that. But
we've got a really overwhelming amount of guesses so far on the Twitter.
Yeah, feed, I feel like there's at least none. I might have to check the math on that.
There's definitely at least none.
So that's good. Just right, exactly what I was planning. So the band I'd like to talk about today is a band called Margot and the Nuclear So-and-Sos, which is a lot of fun. It's a fun just name. Rolls off the tongue. And they've got an album from 2008 called Not Animal. So as you can maybe guess by the name of this band, this is a sort of quintessential indie rock band, something that was dominating maybe the last 10 years. If you're a fan of Death Cab for Cutie, if you get like an erection at the idea of watching Garden State, if you're me in 2004, I would highly recommend this album. It's 4 years before it actually came out.
We have a large demographic that is Steve in 2004.
Well, yeah. I mean, time, man. What can you say about it? So you get like sort of this melancholy sound from these guys with these playful song titles and this sort of winking self-awareness, but still, earnesty. So you have like Cold Kind and Lemon Eyes, Hello Vagina, and Hip Hip Hooray are just a few of the names of some of the songs on this. Gives you an idea with the name of the band what they're shooting for.
Is Margot a name of like the lead singer, or is that just like a clever name?
It's actually a reference to the Royal Tenenbaums.
Oh.
So yeah, there's no Margot. They're dudes. Although there is a young lady in the band, and they do have female backing vocals. But the lead singer is a guy. And the song that I think you should take a listen to, obviously check out the whole album, but the song specifically is called As Tall as Cliffs. And it is a very straightforward. It's the kind of album that I really should love. But I'm kind of lukewarm on. So I still thought it would be important, since you're trying to find your footing in modern music. It's important to consider something that maybe doesn't work 100% of the time. And I think that it's just because it probably has to do with me and how this is the kind of music I was very into for a long period of time, and maybe I've just moved on from that. I mean, I've been listening to a lot more, hip hop of late, so I'm definitely going to give it another go. I listened to Not Animal, the name of this record, a few times before I found out that it was actually released at the same time as another album that Margot and the Nuclear So-and-Sos did called Animal. So there's Animal and Not Animal. That were released on the same day.
Not to make it confusing or anything.
So maybe that's the thing that I'm actually missing. Maybe this album, when taken as a whole with the other album, maybe they complement each other so well that it elevates the music in this one, which is competent. And again, there are no glaring flaws that I could find. The lyrics are clever, the instrumentation is good, it feels organic, it feels alive, and yet for all of the good that I can see in it, I can't quite, give it a 5-star rating or whatever. So I'd be interested for you to listen to it and see what you think. Did you check out the Mountain Goats and John Vanderslice?
I did.
Well, you were doped up on Oxycontin?
Yes, that's the only way to listen to it, in my opinion. I think that, the thing is, so I actually didn't make it through the whole album, the Beat the Champs album, because just, other obligations.
Sure.
So I do plan on...
Because Horace and Pete
Yeah.
a lot longer than you thought?
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't know the first episode of Horace and Pete was an hour and 7 minutes. But no, I think that, one thing that I took away from it was the songs sounded more familiar than I thought, like to each other. Like there wasn't as much variation within the songs. Like I kept thinking, is this a new song or is this the same part of the same song? Or maybe that's part of the idea. I know it's sort of a theme album, so maybe that was intentional. But it was certainly all pleasant, but it didn't grab me by the balls, so to speak. So I mean, I would definitely want to hear the rest of the album, and I liked it, but it wasn't. Again, it just felt like almost very lightweight. Mm-hmm. So
it was like light heavyweight.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's the problem with this album, Not Animal, as well. Because I could see how you could arrive at that conclusion with Beat the Champ, and maybe it's just that sometimes I have such exacting standards that it's not enough to just be competent or just be even good. Like, there's just so many options, so many things I could be listening to, so many things I could be watching. Why not tailor my tastes to myself? Maybe that's a problem moving forward. In a world of so many choices, am I just insulating myself? Am I afraid to broaden my horizons because I don't have to?
Right.
Something to consider.
Yeah, that's part of, I think, as we talked about earlier, just the whole deluge of content, whether it's on television, whether it's in music or anything. It is easy to silo yourself in that way, because there's still plenty to consume, even within your own individualized silo. So all right. Well, did you know that books are still a thing?
What?
Well, they are.
I just got back into magazines.
I know. I just introduced you to magazine articles. But if you want to read something even longer than that, I know if it's hard to imagine something being longer than the Obama article, but there is a book which I will recommend. It is called In the Kingdom of Ice, subtitled The Grand and Terrible Polar Voyage of the USS Jeanette. Oh,
I thought it was going to be a George R.R. Martin thing.
No, well, we'll touch base on that probably here in April as Game of Thrones returns. But anyway, the book is by an author named Hampton Sides, and
that's a pen name, right?
I know, it is awfully cool. It's kind of the John Vanderslice of author names. But so anyway, the book basically, as you might be able to guess from the subtitle there, involves a polar voyage. This is taking place in the late 1800s, and this is that period you'll see me coming back to again and again, because it is so interesting to me to see the world at this time, when it's on the verge of embracing modernity, but not quite there yet. And this book basically, this voyage, is at a time when no one had been to the North Pole yet, and so it was an incredible mystery. And they decide to, there's a lot of different expeditions that want to go there for various reasons. And there's this little passage from the book that I'm going to read, since last week's passage was so popular.
Resounding success, sir.
So I figured, might as well carry on the tradition here. But this, I think, it just really gives you an idea of the sort of the zeitgeist at the time in terms of the polar region. And so it says, by the 1870s, no greater mystery existed on the face of the Earth. Antarctica was, of course, equally mysterious, but the South Pole is considered a less obtainable goal for the leading exploring nations, all of which happen to be located in the Northern Hemisphere. It was hard to comprehend how profoundly the world needed to scratch the Arctic itch. Speculation about what lay at the North Pole permeated popular culture and world literature, from the books of Jules Verne to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, whose scientist protagonist pursues his monster across the floes all the way to the North Pole. Many practical considerations were floated as justifications for pursuing the polar grail. Land masses that might be claimed, minerals seized, shipping routes discovered, colonies founded, new species described. There was a riddle of geography to solve and personal glory to be won. But the quest was ultimately about something even more elemental and atavistic, to reach the farthest place, the ne plus ultra, where no human had been before. And so I think that's
an excellent read, Kyle.
Was that Bane's commentary?
Yeah, sometimes Bane likes to weigh in.
So, but I think that, again, that captures the spirit of the age for you in a way that I think is really interesting to look at from our modern perspective and say this is a world where mysteries like that still existed, where there were unmapped parts of the globe and where, this idea of going places where humans had not been was something that was still obtainable. And I think that's just that would be a fascinating time to live, and be part of. And I think you can, that sense of exploration, I mean, the most recent, I think, iteration of that we've had in our world is with, voyages to space and to the moon and whatnot. And now maybe we're starting to get back to that a little bit with, some of the SpaceX stuff and whatnot. But anyway, but so that's something that's really interesting to me. And then also, what happens here, of course, is, from the subtitle, it talks about the grand and terrible voyage. So you can imagine it probably doesn't go well. And if you know anything about the history of the North Pole, you probably know that eventually the North Pole was reached by people on sleds and dogs, not by people on ships. So you can imagine they didn't make it. And ultimately what happens in this book is that this ship gets locked in the ice. Mm-hmm. And basically trapped in the ice, in the kingdom of ice, as the title says. And these guys have to live there for years. They have to try to survive for years, essentially surrounded by nothing but ice. And these are the kinds of stories that really appeal to me. I mean, people are put in these extreme circumstances where they're really pushed to the very edge of survival. And just seeing how humans cope in those situations, how they adapt, where the limits of human resilience lie.
Right. What happens when the threat isn't existential? It's immediate.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's the kind of stuff that I love. And I'm really attracted to those types of stories. And this is a great one for that. I mean, incredibly well researched, really well written, just again, written in a very, even though it's a nonfiction book, written in a narrative style that just really is gripping and keeps pushing the story forward, and kind of amazing in a way that it's able to have so much narrative momentum for what is largely guys trapped in the ice, in a solitary position in the ship, surrounded by essentially a blank nothingness. But pretty interesting and pretty.
How do they have an account of all of this stuff? They kept logs while they were trapped.
Yeah, they kept logs. A lot of people wrote, diaries and things of that nature. So they're able to have all that documentation, and and some people may or may not have ended up surviving. Which
okay, there are still mysteries to be considered
to the readers of this if they want to check it out. But anyway, In the Kingdom of Ice by Hampton Sides. If you like a good survival tale, if you like anything to do with nautical stuff or the Arctic, any of those topics, or like I said, just like seeing human beings pushed to their very limits, this is a great story for that.
So are you familiar with the Shackleton expedition then?
Yeah, to some degree, yeah.
Does this parallel that pretty?
I mean, it's some of the similar types of challenges.
Does this parallel that pretty? That's just how pretty's my new name for you.
Oh, I feel feeling a little, don't know how to handle this, Steve. You're coming on strong here.
You gotta keep the co-host greased up.
Yeah. Well, with that, we might have to sign off here so we can see if there's any more where that came from. I don't want to get too dirty on the air here. And my goodness, we do have an explicit rating here on iTunes, but you can only push the censors so far.
Well, that's just what they want to label us because we tell the truth. We love greasing each other up. If you can't handle it, that's your damn problem.
Yeah. I mean, we are called the pod couple. I mean, there's probably at least like 50% of our audience who just assume that we're a gay couple.
Yeah.
So.
Well, give the people what they want, Kyle. Come here, big boy.
Yeah, I don't want to. We'll leave that ambiguous. We don't want to come out too strongly on that position. So, nothing wrong with that if we were. But
and Seidenfeld's back in the conversation.
I told you we'd bring it back. Sitcoms live after all. All right. Well, next week, maybe we'll talk about some sitcoms, or maybe we won't. I have no idea what we're talking about next
You'll
week.
have to tune in to find out.
Yep. And you can definitely tune in if you subscribe to us. iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry. Please subscribe. Please tweet
Twitter.
us. And we will see you next week on The Pod Couple.